Deputy Holly Cairns, please.
Firstly, I'd like to join other deputies in expressing sympathies to the families of all those who have passed during this pandemic and in paying tribute to all the essential workers. Compared with education, health or housing, food is rarely thought of as an area of public policy, but it is. It has taken a crisis for many people to realise how important our food producers and retail workers are. This crisis has forced us to ask, where does our food come from? And it has exposed our vulnerability in terms of food security. The flour shortage became a bit of a joke for some people looking to bake their way through the crisis, but it just shows that for many, it's coming as a surprise to learn just how much we rely on imports for basics, like flour, fruit and veg. Even the majority of our potatoes come from abroad. When we rely so heavily on imports, we leave ourselves exposed to disruptions that are completely out of our hands. Disruptions like this one, or Brexit. The Food and Agriculture Organisation of the UN has warned of disruptions to supply chains. Closer to home, the Irish Cattle and Sheep Farmers Association have pointed to our flour shortage, and a fresh outbreak of avian flu is currently causing an egg shortage. We've also seen the impact that panic buying and stocking up is having on food banks. The Committee on World Food Security has stressed the importance of strengthening government management of food markets, yet in many areas Ireland is a net importer of food. CSO figures show that we import more seafood, milk, cereals, vegetables and fruit than we export. Government needs to take an active role in transforming our agriculture sector to ensure it's both balanced and capable of producing the food we need. This emergency, and future ones, demands that food systems move towards a more self-sufficient model. Small change is not enough. It's time for transformative change, for systematic change. I know it won't be easy. I know our food system is so complicated, as is the global one that it's a part of, with competing priorities: consumer preferences, carbon footprint, animal welfare, economics, biodiversity. There are inevitable conflicts there. But what lessons can we learn from this? If we knew this crisis was 5 years away, how would we have better prepared for it? What we grow and eat are the result of our political choices. We know that, unfortunately, there will be more hard times like this. Brexit, the climate and biodiversity crisis. The bottom line is families need access to healthy and affordable, balanced diets, and farmers and other producers need to be able to earn a living. With this in mind, I want to ask the Minister what plans the Department will put in place to prepare for future potential disruptions to international food supply chains and to end the country's reliance on imported fresh produce. What steps will the Minister take to expand our capacity to produce our own fruit and vegetables instead of importing produce that could be grown here? Throughout this crisis, we've heard politicians referring to taking expert advice, something I think we all agree is a great call, but not just during a pandemic. When we talk about achieving a balance between a fair price for food producers, a fair wage for people who work in the food industry, and a fair price for consumers, experts have advised that, where possible, shortening the supply chain between producers and consumer is vital, which is why I, like many others, was shocked at the closure of farmers' markets. Just like supermarkets, they are essential food retail outlets. After I drew attention to this, people have been in touch with me from across Cork, Waterford, Limerick and beyond, seeking their immediate reopening. Thriving markets in West Cork and nationwide create supply chains that help us secure our food sovereignty and attract thousands of tourists. Many market traders are small-scale producers with extremely tight operating margins who rely on the markets with direct access to customers, taking out the so-called middleman. Before closure, markets showed great ingenuity in enabling social distancing and responsible transactions. Initiatives like Neighbour Food have helped connect consumers and producers during this time, but what rural communities really need is the return to weekly markets. Bearing all this in mind, I'm asking the Minister to ensure that farmers' markets will be allowed to reopen as soon as possible as forms of essential retail outlets, and similarly to everybody here today, to enable allotments to reopen at the same time as sources of small-scale food production. Respecting workers is something else that's come up. It's fundamental to a sustainable food model. In the recent Keelings controversy, the media focused on the spread of the coronavirus, but the incident highlights a broader issue within the food industry: the treatment of workers. Although the jobs were advertised, It was not economically viable, it seems, for local people to take them. This is typical of the sector. Ireland, like the UK and other countries, relies on international, seasonal and temporary workers who are often treated poorly. This situation is even worse in the developing world, where agricultural workers are subjected to horrendous abuse and exploitation. We need an agri-food system that can support families and communities, not only in West Cork and Ireland, but also globally. I have two questions on this. To give us all confidence that the food we consume originates from a fair and just system, can you, Minister, instruct the Department to play a more active role in ensuring the food produced in Ireland and imported here has been produced ethically? And bearing in mind that tomorrow is Workers' Day, what measures are in place nationally and on a European level to ensure the protection of the rights of workers, whether they are permanent, temporary or migrant during the COVID-19 emergency? Thank you.
Minister.
I think when we talk about food security, it's important to remember that whilst we do import substantial volume and value of food, we are a very significant exporter of food to over 180 different countries around the world. Our exports in 2019 were valued in excess of 14 billion and sustained employment for over 170,000 people. So there is a global complexity to the food market which you allude to, and I accept, that shorter food supply chains are something that consumers are interested in. But we have certain global advantages in terms of our capacity to produce certain foods, and I don't think that they are incompatible with each other. And farmers' markets, the organic sector, allotments are all part of that milieu that is involved in the shorter food supply chains. And there's a role for that. But I mean, in terms of, say, the value of the organic sector relative to the value of the agri-food industry, it's minuscule, and not everybody will become organic, and not everybody can afford the premium associated with it. So I think there's a role for both, and we support, for example, in terms of our horticultural sector, we have a support scheme in 2020, which I think is in the order of €6 million available to the horticultural sector. Now, they will grow the products that it's commercially viable for them to grow. Some things it is cheaper to import, and that's the realities of the marketplace. We can't force people to engage in enterprises where they will not make an economic return from them. And as I said, we do support the horticulture sector. On your question of the ethics of production systems, we have laws here in respect of minimum wage, for example, and all employees are protected by that minimum wage. And in fact, it is one of the highest, if not the highest, minimum wage levels in the European Union. So in terms of workers' rights, that is a fundamental protection for workers. And many pay more than that. Many provide accommodation as well as the minimum wage and higher for their employees. So I would be kind of concerned if the impression went out there that this is an exploitative industry that is without any reference to the legal framework that it has to operate within. And I have no evidence to suggest that, and I think it would be wrong to kind of create an impression that we're dealing with a sector that's indifferent to ethics or workers' rights, etc. Obviously, we operate in the European Union context in terms of ethics in a broader sense, in terms of animal welfare, etc. And we have, in fact, for example, in an issue which attracts a lot of concern, for example, live exports, we have a legal framework that is, in fact, higher than the minimum requirements in terms of live exports that the European Union requires. So we're very conscious of our obligations in that regard and of our customers' concerns in that regard. So we, as I said, operate to EU standards plus in that area. But in the context of food security, there's no room for vigilance, and I've often made the point across the European Union that, for example, given the challenges around the age profile of agriculture, we really are an ageing workforce across the European Union. It's a big challenge. And there's a real danger if we don't attract new blood into the industry that, you know, we could run off a cliff in terms of our food security. We are, as an island nation, one of the most food secure countries on earth. I think, if not jointly with Canada, I think we're joint first. So, but there's no room for complacency here. We have an age profile problem in agriculture, as they have across the world, in fact, not just in the European Union. So there's nothing to be taken for granted here. You know, and in terms of the reform of the Common Agricultural Policy, it is one of the areas that we need to be careful about, not just seducing young people into a career in agriculture, but making sure that if we attract young people into it, that we can give them a security in terms of an income that they can earn comparable with what their peers earn.
The time is up, Minister. Thank you. We move on to